There are moments in life when the deepest wounds are not inflicted by enemies, but by the very people we once trusted with our hearts. Sometimes the sharpest cruelty doesn't come from strangers on the outside, but from the hands of those who once held us in love, those we were born to love, born from. But what happens when that love curdles into pain? Why does a son, someone raised under the warmth and protection of his mother, end up humiliating her? It's a question that not only tears families apart, but also exposes one of the most haunting truths of the human psyche. Behind that painful behavior lies a story far more complex than simple resentment. It's a story of emotional entanglement, of unspoken wounds, and of unconscious forces playing out through generations. In this video, we'll go beyond the surface. Together, we'll explore what lies beneath this destructive dynamic through the lens of psychoanalysis and the wisdom of Carl Jung. We'll look at how unconscious conflicts, cultural conditioning, and the shadow aspects of personality can transform love into something tragically cruel. And in the end, you won't just understand the psychology behind it, you'll gain insight into the silent war that often wages beneath even the most familiar relationships. Let's begin with one of Jung's deepest truths. What we fight in others is often what we cannot bear to face in ourselves. When an adult son humiliates his mother, we're not simply witnessing a moment of frustration or impatience. We're seeing a deeper systemic pattern, one that's rooted in layers of unresolved psychological tension. This cruelty isn't born from indifference. In fact, it emerges from something more dangerous, emotional entanglement that never matured, never healed, never found healthy resolution. To the unconscious mind, the mother isn't just a person. As Carl Jung taught, she is an archetype, a symbolic representation of the source of life itself. She embodies not just nurture but dependency, not just comfort but vulnerability. And when a son lashes out at his mother, he isn't just reacting to her behavior in the present. He's battling the ghosts of his past, his helplessness, his dependency, his original vulnerability. The act of humiliation then becomes a twisted form of communication. It becomes a language, the language of a soul that never learned how to express its fear, pain, or longing in a healthy way. The child who never had the tools to articulate his inner turmoil grows into an adult who expresses it through destruction. Love, when unprocessed and overwhelming, can turn into rage. Gratitude that feels like a burden can harden into resentment. The deep desire for closeness becomes a desperate push for distance. And nowhere is this more evident than when the mother begins to weaken, when she grows older, falls ill, or becomes dependent again. In those moments, something profound shifts. The son who once depended on her is now in a position of power. But instead of responding with compassion, he may respond with coldness, or worse, contempt. It's as if the tables have turned, and instead of embracing the opportunity for healing, he unconsciously seeks revenge. Not out of hate, but from years of emotional debt that were never resolved. Jung observed that we often attack in others what mirrors our own insecurities. The aging mother, once a source of protection, now becomes a symbol of his deepest vulnerability. Her weakness reflects his own. Her dependence triggers the shame of once having needed her. Her love, once unconditional, becomes a painful reminder that his identity was built in part on that very dependence. And so the son lashes out, not because he feels nothing, but because he feels too much. And he doesn't know how to hold it all. Humiliation becomes a desperate attempt to create emotional distance, a false signal of strength. He believes that by devaluing his mother, by pushing her down, he can finally lift himself up. That in rejecting the source of his emotional origins, he can finally claim autonomy. But this never works, because every insult hurled at her also echoes inside him. Every degrading comment he throws at her becomes a dagger to the child within the boy who once clung to her in love and fear. And thus, the cycle continues. A vicious loop of self-sabotage disguised as self-protection. Freud would point to repression here. He would say that the son is repressing the softer emotions, the love, the tenderness, the gratitude, because they feel like a threat to his constructed self-image. To be a man, he thinks he must be strong. To be strong, he must feel nothing. And to feel nothing, he must destroy the parts of himself that once needed, once cried, once clung. But the heart doesn't forget, and so what gets repressed returns, not as love, but as aggression. The love that cannot be allowed to exist becomes a drive for destruction. Let's look even closer. When a son humiliates his mother, he often does so through the mechanism of projection. He displaces his own shortcomings, his fears, his internal chaos onto her. He calls her clingy because he never learned how to set boundaries. He accuses her of manipulation while he suppresses his own emotional honesty. He paints her as the villain so he doesn't have to look at the war within himself. These projections are so intense, so all-consuming, that the real woman, the complex human being, disappears. What remains is a distorted image, a scapegoat onto which he unloads all of his unresolved conflicts. Jung reminds us that the shadow, the part of ourselves we deny or repress, is often what we fight most fiercely in others. The son who attacks his mother's emotions may be terrified of his own. The man who mocks her care may secretly yearn for connection but doesn't know how to ask for it. And so the tragedy unfolds. Cruelty becomes a perverse form of closeness. The son can't let go, not emotionally. He hasn't truly separated from her. He hasn't individuated. He fights her because deep down he's still tethered to her. The aggression is not evidence of independence. It's evidence of entanglement. Here lies another hidden dimension, the fear of individuation. According to Jung, individuation is the process of becoming one's true self, a journey that involves separating from the parents but with respect and understanding. True individuation is not rebellion, it's transformation. But the son who humiliates his mother hasn't made this transition. He's still stuck in a rebellion that should have ended in adolescence. This isn't the healthy defiance of a teenager finding his edges. This is the bitter rebellion of a man who never learned how to develop mature autonomy. He is still trying to prove his independence by tearing down the one who once gave him life. The ritual of humiliation becomes a signal, a misguided declaration, I am not yours anymore. But the irony is devastating. In trying to prove his freedom, he proves how deeply he's still imprisoned by the past. The mother in this scenario becomes a tragic figure, not just a target, but a mirror. A mirror that reflects not only who the son was, but who he refuses to acknowledge he still is. And yet within this pain lies the potential for healing. Understanding this dynamic doesn't mean excusing cruelty, far from it, but it allows us to name what's happening beneath the surface. It allows us to step away from shame, from blame, and begin the difficult work of awareness. Because once you name the wound, you can begin to heal it. As we saw earlier, when a son humiliates his mother, it often reveals not true independence, but a painful entanglement, one rooted in unresolved emotional conflict. Yet the complexity of this dynamic deepens when we turn to look at the other side, the mother herself. Because she too is rarely just a passive victim. Her pain is real, yes. Her suffering is often profound. But even in her position, she may unconsciously contribute to the very cycle that hurts her. Imagine a mother who has poured her entire life into raising her son, nurturing, protecting, sacrificing, only to one day find that her devotion is met not with gratitude, but with contempt. It's one of the most heartbreaking reversals of love, but it is also one that reveals a deeper psychological truth. Sometimes the mother struggles to let go. She clings to her role as the mother because somewhere along the way, that role became her entire identity. Without it, she may feel lost, invisible. Carl Jung recognized that in every destructive relational pattern, both people unconsciously help to maintain the dysfunction. It is rarely the fault of just one side. A mother who allows herself to be humiliated again and again may be sending subtle unconscious messages that invite this treatment. She may not even realize it. But her silence, her passivity, her refusal to set boundaries, they speak. They tell the son this is acceptable. And deep down, she may accept the role of the victim because she believes it's the only way to stay connected to him. She fears that if she resists or stands tall, she might lose him entirely. But this belief isn't love, it's unresolved trauma. A woman who sacrifices her dignity to preserve a bond often never learned to recognize her own worth outside the identity of mother. She equates devotion with self-erasure. She confuses love with self-abandonment. And the tragedy is that this kind of sacrifice doesn't redeem the relationship. It worsens it. Why? Because when she refuses to claim her own value, the son unconsciously begins to mirror that same devaluation. A person who does not respect themselves will often find that others don't either. A mother who sets no boundaries teaches her son not through words but through experience that boundaries don't matter. And when boundaries don't exist, disrespect thrives. Here we begin to see the full weight of the tragedy. Both the son and the mother are trapped not out of malice, but because of patterns so deeply buried in the unconscious that they cannot see them. The son lashes out at a version of his mother that no longer truly exists, a version he's built out of memory projection and pain. The mother continues to love a son who now interprets her love as weakness and punishes her for it. This pattern is rarely born in a single lifetime. More often it is passed down like a wound carried from one generation to the next. A son who humiliates his mother may have grown up watching his father do the same. He absorbed it, internalized it, learned it as normal. To him, male identity may have been built on domination, silence, or superiority. The humiliation of the woman, especially the mother, becomes a behavior so familiar, so deeply conditioned, that it escapes conscious scrutiny. And on the other side, a mother who allows herself to be degraded may have also grown up without ever learning the language of self-respect. She may have had parents who ignored her boundaries, who rewarded obedience but punished assertiveness. She inherited the belief that love requires pain, that care demands sacrifice. And she passes that belief on, not through lectures, but through example. So the cycle continues. The son shaped by early emotional wounds unconsciously replicates the disrespect he witnessed. The mother shaped by her own unmet needs endures it. Both suffer, neither fully sees the other, and the only way out, the only path to healing, is conscious inner work. This means courage, the courage to face your own shadow, the courage to stop blaming and start looking inward, to ask, what am I still carrying that doesn't belong to mom? What patterns have I been unconsciously repeating? There is another force at play here that often goes unnoticed, what psychoanalysts might call a narcissistic wound. When a son becomes an adult and begins to face his own shortcomings, the moments he's failed, the parts of himself that feel inadequate, the mother can become a deeply threatening figure. Why? Because she's seen it all. She knows his history. She's witnessed him in his most vulnerable states, the tears, the fears, the dependency of childhood. And for a man trying desperately to maintain an image of strength, independence, and emotional invincibility, this makes her dangerous. Not in reality, but in perception. Her very existence challenges the fragile illusion he's built around himself. She becomes a living reminder of his humanity, of his weakness, of his beginnings. Jung would describe this as a conflict between the persona, the mask we show the world, and the shadow, everything we try to hide, deny, or reject in ourselves. The mother in this case becomes a walking embodiment of the son's shadow. She represents everything he fears others might see in him: vulnerability, dependence, softness, need. This inner conflict is often intensified by cultural conditioning. In many societies, men are raised to equate masculinity with detachment, dominance, and self-reliance. To show emotion is to show weakness. To need your mother, especially openly, is seen as immature, even shameful. So what happens? The son feels pressure to prove his masculinity. But instead of doing it through integrity, responsibility, or quiet strength, he confuses cruelty for power. He devalues feminine care, starting with the most accessible symbol of it, his mother. He believes unconsciously that only by rejecting her can he fully claim his manhood. But this is a false victory, a hollow triumph. This confusion becomes even more painful when the mother begins to decline physically or emotionally, when she becomes ill, when she asks for help, when she shows weakness. These are moments that demand compassion, but they trigger fear, because in her vulnerability, the son sees his own. Instead of accepting that he too is human, he projects. He blames, he resents. Freud once said, "We often hate what we most fear." And here that truth is painfully clear. The son is not just lashing out at his mother, he is lashing out at the reality of aging, at the inevitability of dependence, at the truth that no one, no matter how strong, escapes the need for others. And so the mother becomes a scapegoat for everything he cannot control. Her needs are interpreted as demands. Her fragility becomes an offense. She is punished not for what she does, but for what she represents, his own inescapable humanity. But what's most tragic is these projections don't free him. They trap him. They deepen the split between who he is and who he pretends to be. Jung believed that true psychological development requires integrating the shadow, not projecting it. The son who humiliates his mother has not done this work. Instead, he externalizes his pain and fights it in the place he thinks is safest at home. But this battle only creates more wounds, and it often escalates at the worst possible time when the mother most needs care, when her strength fades, when her love remains even as her body fails. And the son, still locked in emotional adolescence, misses the sacred opportunity to grow to mature to offer real support. Instead, he lashes out because that's the only language he ever learned for dealing with fear. Finally, we must acknowledge how culture shapes this tragedy. In many societies, men are not encouraged to show emotional responsibility. They are taught to provide, to act, to lead, but not to nurture, not to feel. And so when their mother ages, becomes needy, or simply asks for presence, many sons feel overwhelmed. Not because they don't care, but because they were never taught how to. And so they shut down. Or worse, they lash out. But this doesn't have to be the end of the story. As we'll explore further, healing is possible. It begins with awareness. And from that awareness, the cycle can finally be broken. As we've explored, the pain between a son and his mother is rarely one-sided. Often, both carry unconscious wounds that entangle them in patterns of projection, resentment, and silence. And while the son's humiliation may be more visible, the mother's role, shaped by emotional need and lack of boundaries, is often woven quietly into the roots of this suffering. But there's more to this story. In many cultures, men are not taught how to respond to vulnerability, especially when that vulnerability appears in someone they associate with strength, protection, or caregiving. They grow up learning how to perform strength, not how to offer it through presence or tenderness. Emotional support. That's been assigned to women, so when their mothers begin to need care, when age, illness, or loneliness begins to show, many sons don't know how to respond. And what the psyche cannot understand, it often rejects. That rejection can turn cruel. A son who feels emotionally overwhelmed may respond with passive aggression, not because he truly lacks love, but because he's never been taught how to express it without feeling exposed. Instead of meeting his mother's needs with maturity, he punishes her for having them in the first place. Her need for support becomes a perceived burden. Her tenderness, once welcomed, becomes the trigger for his shame. So rather than learning how to care, he distances. Rather than facing the discomfort, he blames. And what begins as emotional avoidance gradually morphs into coldness, then into contempt. This is where modern life adds fuel to the fire. Many adult sons now live far from their parents. Their lives are full: careers, partners, children. Physical distance is unavoidable. But what starts as geography soon turns into something deeper: emotional distance. The mother, once the center of his world, becomes a background figure, a voice on the phone, a name on a message thread. And slowly, painfully, she is transformed into an abstract object, a projection screen for all the unprocessed guilt, frustration, and fear the son hasn't dealt with. Technology, which should bridge the gap, often becomes a quiet weapon. Texts are left unread, calls go unanswered, visits are delayed then forgotten, birthdays are remembered through generic emojis. And this form of passive aggression can be even more painful than an open argument, because it leaves the mother in limbo, trapped in silence, wondering if she's done something wrong, if she's being punished for loving too much. Jung taught us that behind every intense emotional reaction lies an unconscious complex, a cluster of emotional energy that shapes how we perceive and respond to the world. The son who responds with cruelty or avoidance may be carrying a mother complex, a psychological imprint formed early in life. This complex can take different forms. For some, it manifests as excessive emotional entanglement. The son never truly separates. His identity remains fused with his mother's presence. And deep down, this symbiosis feels suffocating. He fears losing himself, and so he lashes out not as an act of cruelty, but as a desperate plea for freedom. Yet instead of healthy separation, he chooses destruction. Humiliation becomes his misguided escape route. For others, the complex takes the opposite shape, a deep aversion to anything maternal. Any form of emotional closeness feels like a trap. Dependency is shameful. Softness is weakness. The son has internalized the belief that closeness equals danger, that being needed is being chained. And so preemptively he attacks. Not because the mother has done something wrong, but because he fears what her presence represents. These two extremes, emotional fusion and emotional rejection, reveal the same root of relationship that never found healthy balance. The son never learned how to be connected and autonomous at the same time. He swings like a pendulum between total dependence and total dismissal, unable to find the middle path of mature love. And where is the mother in this? Often she is caught in a tragic loop, wanting connection but fearing abandonment, giving endlessly but receiving humiliation in return. Her entire identity may be wrapped around being the mother. Without it, who is she? If her son pulls away, does she even exist anymore? So she clings. She tolerates the coldness. She accepts the silence. And in doing so, she unconsciously contributes to the cycle. Her inability to set emotional boundaries sends a message. This is okay. Her willingness to endure mistreatment becomes a mirror, one that reflects back to her son the false belief that love and self-abandonment are the same thing. But they're not. Jung was clear about this. True healing begins with integration facing the shadow, understanding the unconscious patterns that shape us and choosing to respond rather than react. For the son, this means turning inward, recognizing that his cruelty is not strength, that his rejection is not independence, that real maturity means being able to sit with his own fear, his own shame, his own longing, without projecting them onto the woman who raised him. He must learn that true masculinity isn't about dominance. It's about vulnerability held with strength. It's about learning to nurture without feeling weak, to protect without controlling, to care without resenting. And for the mother, she must also walk her own path of transformation. She must reclaim her worth beyond the role of caregiver. She must realize that love does not require self-erasure, that boundaries are not rejection, they are self-respect, that she is allowed to say no, that she can love her son and still demand to be treated with dignity. The bitter truth is this healing only happens when both are willing to see their part in the pattern. The son must admit that his cruelty is a symptom of his inner fear. The mother must acknowledge that her tolerance may be an unconscious form of control, trying to keep love by never challenging it. It's painful, no one said it wouldn't be, but this is the price of transformation, and it is worth it. Because from this pain, a new kind of relationship can emerge, one not built on guilt or role-based loyalty, but on mutual respect and genuine emotional autonomy. Jung believed that our greatest psychological treasures are hidden in the darkest corners of our psyche. And this destructive mother-son dynamic, as tragic as it appears, also holds profound potential for healing. If the son learns to integrate his shadow to own his vulnerability, instead of hiding from it, he can become a man who is both grounded and compassionate, a man who doesn't fear love. If the mother learns to stand in her own worth, to stop mistaking suffering for devotion, she can become a woman who loves fiercely without ever abandoning herself again. That humiliation, the gaping wound between them, doesn't have to be the end of the story. It can become the beginning of conscious love, of honest dialogue, of boundaries born not from fear, but from wisdom. But it requires something rare in today's world: courage. Not the loud performative kind, the quiet kind, the kind that looks inward and says, I am ready to see the truth even if it hurts. So in the end, the real question isn't simply why does a son humiliate his mother? The real question is, how do both find their way out of the shadow? And the answer, it doesn't lie in blame or shame or justification. It lies in awareness, because behind every cruel word, every cold silence, every act of rejection, there is a wounded soul. A part of us that still longs to be seen, to be loved, to be safe. Jung once said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. So if this story has touched something inside you, whether you see yourself as the mother, the son, or simply someone watching from the sidelines, know this: the pain you feel is not the end. It's the beginning of understanding. And in that understanding, transformation begins. If these words resonate with your own life or awaken a memory long buried, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. This space exists for connection, reflection, and healing. And don't forget to subscribe for more deep explorations of the human psyche, because only by facing our darkest impulses can we begin to live in our brightest truth.